In 53 BC, 10,000 Roman soldiers vanished into the desert after one of Rome's most catastrophic defeats. But here's what historians don't want you to know. Some of them may have ended up fighting as warriors for China. Today, we're investigating the evidence that could rewrite everything we know about ancient history. This isn't just another historical mystery. This is a detective story that spans continents, centuries. It challenges everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. The catastrophe. Picture this. It's May 53rd BC, and you're standing in the scorching desert of Mesopotamia. You're watching one of the most catastrophic military disasters in Roman history unfold before your eyes. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, co-ruler with Julius Caesar and Pompey. He has just led 7 full legions into a death trap that will echo through eternity. But let me paint the full picture of this disaster, because the details are crucial to understanding how our mystery begins. Crassus wasn't just any general. This was the man who had defeated Spartacus. He owned more gold than the Roman treasury, who commanded respect through sheer wealth. He had assembled what he thought was an unstoppable force, 50,000 men including 7 legions, 4,000 cavalry, and 4,000 light infantry. These weren't just soldiers. These were the elite warriors who had conquered Gaul, who had crushed rebellions across the Mediterranean. The Battle of Carrhae wasn't just a defeat. It was an absolute massacre. It would traumatize Rome for generations. According to the ancient historian Plutarch, Roman casualties amounted to about 20,000 killed, 10,000 captured, which made the battle one of the costliest defeats in Roman history. It was the worst Roman defeat since the disastrous loss to Hannibal at Cannae in 216 BC. But here's what makes this story absolutely terrifying. The Parthians didn't win through superior numbers. They didn't win through better equipment. They won through a military innovation that Roman legions had never encountered. Mobile horse archers using hit-and-run tactics that turned Rome's greatest strength into a fatal weakness. Imagine you're a Roman legionnaire in that desert. You've trained for years in formation fighting, shield walls, and disciplined advances. But suddenly, you're facing enemies who won't stand and fight. The Parthian horse archers devastated the unprepared Romans with hit-and-run tactics, feigning retreats as they shot. Every time you tried to charge, they melted away like smoke. Every time you formed defensive positions, arrows rained down from impossible angles. The sight of Publius's head on the lance of a Parthian cavalryman severely distressed Crassus. The unsettled commander ordered a hasty retreat from the battlefield, leaving behind 4,000 wounded Roman soldiers. They were immediately put to death by the rapidly advancing Parthians. And Crassus himself? The accounts of his death are both legendary and horrifying. Some sources say the Parthians poured molten gold down his throat, a symbolic punishment for his legendary greed. Others describe him being killed during negotiations when the situation turned violent. But the exact manner of his death matters less than what happened to his army. The following morning, the Parthians arrived at the Roman camp, slaughtered the 4,000 wounded and abandoned soldiers. They found and wiped out the missing 4 cohorts. The mathematics of disaster were stark. Roughly 1/2 of the Roman army of about 40,000 men, including Crassus and his son, perished. 10,000 men were made captive, and only 10,000 were able to escape. Now here's where our mystery truly begins. Those 10,000 captured Roman soldiers. Elite legionaries who had conquered territories from Britain to North Africa simply vanished from history. No records of their fate, no mentions of executions or ransoming. They disappeared into the vast expanse of the Parthian Empire as if they never existed. For 2,000 years, historians assumed these men died in captivity or lived out their days as slaves. Brutal, but predictable for the ancient world. But what if I told you there's evidence, documented, recorded evidence, that some of these vanished legionaries ended up somewhere absolutely impossible? Somewhere that would make you question everything you think you know about the reach of the ancient world. The journey into darkness. To understand how Roman soldiers could end up in China, we need to follow their terrifying journey into the unknown. What happened to those 10,000 prisoners after Carrhae is a story of survival, adaptation, and epic migration. Picture yourself as one of those captured legionnaires. You've survived the slaughter, but you're thousands of miles from home. You're wearing chains in a foreign land. Your comrades are dead. Your general is dead. Rome thinks you're dead. The Parthian Empire stretches endlessly to the east. A vast network of territories, vassal kingdoms, and nomadic tribes that extends far beyond anything Romans had ever imagined. Now here's what we know about Parthian military practice that most historians overlook. The Parthians didn't just execute valuable prisoners. They relocated them. They used captured soldiers as military colonists in frontier regions, especially along their contested eastern borders where they faced constant pressure from Central Asian nomads. This wasn't mercy, this was strategic brilliance. Experienced Roman soldiers, even as prisoners, represented incredible military value. Their discipline, their engineering skills, their knowledge of siege warfare, these were assets the Parthians could exploit, especially in their ongoing conflicts along the Silk Road. But here's where the story becomes absolutely incredible. The eastern frontier of the Parthian Empire wasn't some settled, stable region. It was a chaotic borderland where territories changed hands regularly, where nomadic tribes carved out kingdoms. Kingdoms that could rise and fall within a generation, and where military units could end up serving different masters. They could serve a dozen different masters in a single decade. Archaeological evidence from Central Asia tells us something fascinating about this period. The mid-1st century BC was a time of massive upheaval along the Silk Road. The Han Chinese were expanding westward. Nomadic confederations were collapsing and reforming. The Parthians were struggling to maintain control over vast distances. In this chaos, military units didn't just serve their original masters. They became mercenaries, selling their skills to whoever could pay them, whoever could offer them land, whoever could give them survival. Now imagine our Roman prisoners, maybe 17 years after their capture. They've learned local languages. They've adapted their fighting techniques. Some have married local women, started families, built new lives in this impossible landscape. They're no longer Romans, they're something new, something hybrid. And then comes an opportunity that would seem like pure fantasy. A charismatic warlord named Zhiji Chanyu. He's carved out a kingdom in Central Asia, is recruiting experienced soldiers for a campaign that could make them all rich and powerful. These former Romans, now veterans of Central Asian warfare, join his forces, but Zhiji makes a fatal mistake. He challenges the expanding power of Han China. And that's when Chinese historians, meticulous record keepers who documented everything they encountered, witness something that will puzzle scholars. Something that will puzzle scholars for the next 2,000 years. The impossible witness. Fast forward to 36 BC, 17 years after those Roman soldiers vanished into Parthian captivity. General Chen Tang of the Han Dynasty is preparing for what should be a routine military campaign. A campaign against a rebellious warlord named Zhiji Chanyu in the remote fortress of Jiji. The fortress is located in what is now Kazakhstan. Chen Tang is no ordinary general. He's a veteran of the Han expansion campaigns, a man who's fought nomadic tribes across Central Asia, someone who's seen every fighting technique the steppes have to offer. So when the battle begins, and he witnesses something completely unprecedented, his shock is genuine and historically significant. Picture the scene. The morning sun rises over the Central Asian steppe. Dust clouds billow as two armies maneuver for position. Chen Tang's forces advance toward Jiji's fortress. Chinese infantry, cavalry, and allied tribal units, expecting to face the typical nomadic fighting style. Nomadic armies relied on mobility, archery, and cavalry charges. Their defensive strategies were fluid, based on retreating, regrouping, and striking from unexpected angles. Chinese generals had developed specific tactics to counter these approaches. They had developed these tactics over centuries of steppe warfare, but when the battle begins, Chen Tang's forces slam into something completely different, something that stops his advance cold. The Chinese chronicler recorded the moment with obvious bewilderment. The enemy formed a peculiar defensive formation, with infantry arranged like fish scales, shields interlocked in perfect geometric precision, creating an impenetrable barrier that our cavalry could not break. Now here's what makes this account absolutely revolutionary for our investigation. The Chinese had been fighting steppe nomads for over 400 years by this point. They had detailed military manuals describing every known defensive formation used by Central Asian tribes. They had detailed military manuals describing every known defensive formation used by Central Asian tribes. Yet Chen Tong's chronicler describes this formation as completely unprecedented, something he'd never seen before, something that required a completely different tactical approach. Modern military historians who've studied this account are unanimous. The fish-scale formation described by the Chinese matches exactly the Roman testudo formation, the interlocking shield wall technique that was the signature defensive move of Roman legionaries. But here's what makes this impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The testudo wasn't just any military formation. It required years of training, perfect discipline, and specific shield designs that simply didn't exist among nomadic tribes. You couldn't improvise a testudo. You couldn't learn it from descriptions. It had to be taught by men who had drilled in it for years, men who understood its complex mechanics, men who had used it in actual combat. Chen Tong had never seen anything like it. Neither had any Chinese general in recorded history. This defensive strategy was uniquely, unmistakably Roman in its precision and execution. Think about the geographical impossibility of this moment. In 36 BC, Rome and China existed in completely separate worlds. No Roman had ever seen the Great Wall. No Chinese had ever seen the Colosseum. The Silk Road was barely functioning as a trade route. Official diplomatic contact between the empires was still centuries in the future. Yet here, in the middle of Central Asia, Chinese soldiers are recording a military encounter with tactics. Tactics that could only have been learned in the legions of Rome. The battle itself was brutal, but decisive. Gigi's fortress fell after a siege. A siege that showcased not just the mysterious testudo formation, but also siege engineering techniques that impressed the Chinese. The warlord died, his kingdom collapsed, and his forces were scattered or captured. And those mysterious soldiers who had fought in Roman formation? Chen Tong was so intrigued by their fighting style, so impressed by their discipline and skill, that he actually recorded their fate in his official report to the Han Emperor, a document that still survives in Chinese imperial archives. They were relocated to a frontier garrison town to serve the Chinese Empire as military colonists. But here's where this story becomes absolutely impossible to ignore, because that garrison town still exists today, and its ancient name will send chills down your spine. The town called Rome. Welcome to Liqian, China, a small farming community in Gansu province. To any casual observer, it looks like countless other rural Chinese towns. Farmers tend their fields using methods passed down through generations. Children play in dusty streets. Life moves at the same peaceful pace it has for centuries. But this unremarkable town holds secrets that could rewrite the history books. Because Liqian isn't just any name, it's the ancient Chinese transliteration of legion. And more specifically, it was the Han Dynasty term for the Roman Empire itself. Let that revelation sink in for a moment. The town where those mysterious soldiers were reportedly stationed. After displaying Roman military tactics 2,000 years ago, has a name that literally means Roman in ancient Chinese. In a country where place names carry deep historical significance, where towns are named after geographical features, founding dynasties or important events, we have a settlement named after a foreign empire that supposedly had no contact with China. But the mystery of Liqian goes far deeper than just its name. In the 1940s, Homer H. Dubbs, a professor of Chinese history at the University of Oxford, suggested that the people of Liqian were descended from Roman legionaries taken prisoner at the Battle of Carrhae. Dubbs had spent decades studying Chinese historical records and was struck by the convergence of evidence: the Battle of Gigi, the Roman-style tactics, the relocation to a garrison town, and most importantly, the physical characteristics of Liqian's residents. When Western researchers first arrived in Liqian in the 1940s and 1950s, they were immediately struck by something extraordinary. Many of the local residents didn't look typically Han Chinese. They had deep-set eyes, prominent noses, and some even had blonde hair and green eyes, physical features that are extremely rare in this part of China. But these weren't just random genetic variations. The residents of Liqian showed a consistent pattern of Caucasian features that suggested European ancestry. And crucially, these features were concentrated in specific family lines that could trace their lineage back to the Han Dynasty period, exactly when the mysterious soldiers would have been settled there. The locals had their own stories that had been passed down through 70 generations, oral traditions spoke of foreign ancestors who came from the far western lands beyond the desert. These ancestors, the stories claimed, were warriors who fought differently, built differently, and brought strange customs that blended with local traditions over centuries. Now picture yourself walking through ancient Lijian, examining the foundations that archaeologists have uncovered. What you'd see would challenge everything you know about ancient Chinese architecture. Instead of the traditional Chinese courtyard layouts or the curved feng shui-influenced designs. Typical of Han Dynasty settlements, Lijian's ancient foundations reveal something completely different. Rectangular military layouts with thick defensive walls, geometric precision, and construction techniques that look suspiciously Roman. Local folklore, preserved in family histories and village traditions, spoke of ancestors who built in stone rather than wood, who constructed straight roads rather than winding paths, who organized their settlements in grid patterns. Grid patterns that were completely alien to traditional Chinese urban planning. But here's what makes this evidence absolutely explosive. When geneticists finally arrived in Lijian in the early 2000s, to test these remarkable claims scientifically, they discovered something that should have been genetically impossible. Tests found that the DNA of some villagers in Lijian was 56% Caucasian in origin. In one of the most genetically isolated regions of China, they found European bloodlines. European bloodlines that represented the majority genetic heritage of significant portions of the population. Think about the staggering implications. A town named Roman in ancient Chinese, populated by people with majority European ancestry, built on Roman-style foundations. Located exactly where Chinese records say foreign soldiers displaying Roman tactics were stationed after the Battle of Carrhae. As Yang Gonglei of the Beijing Normal University said, Yongchang County is on the Silk Road, suggesting that this genetic diversity could be explained by normal trade route migration patterns. But the physical evidence was about to get even more incredible because archaeologists were just getting started. The archaeological revelation. The year 2001 marked a turning point in this incredible mystery. That's when a team of Chinese archaeologists, led by Dr. Yuan Honggeng and equipped with ground-penetrating radar, satellite mapping, and modern excavation techniques, began the first comprehensive archaeological survey of Lijian. What they uncovered over the next decade would send shockwaves through the international archaeological community and provide the most compelling physical evidence yet for this impossible theory. Picture this. You're standing in a freshly excavated trench, brushing centuries of accumulated sediment away from what initially appears to be just another section of ancient wall. But as more earth is carefully removed, layer by layer, you begin to realize this isn't just any wall. It's built using construction techniques that are completely foreign to ancient China. The archaeologists discovered defensive fortifications built in a distinctly rectangular pattern, with walls over 6 feet thick, and foundations that extended deep underground. Now here's what makes this discovery impossible to ignore. Ancient Chinese fortifications were typically built following completely different principles. Traditional Chinese military architecture of the Han Dynasty followed feng shui principles and natural terrain contours. Walls curved with the landscape. Defensive positions were built in circular or oval patterns that harmonized with natural energy flows. Gates faced auspicious directions. The entire philosophy of Chinese fortification was based on working with natural forces, not against them. But these walls in Lijian, they were built in the rigid, geometric style of Roman military engineering. Straight lines, perfect right angles, defensive positions calculated for maximum military efficiency rather than spiritual harmony. Dr. Yuan Honggeng was stunned by what emerged from the excavations. The construction showed evidence of advanced engineering techniques. Sophisticated drainage systems that channeled water with Roman-style efficiency, foundation stones cut and fitted with precision. Precision that matched Roman building standards, and most incredibly, mortar compositions that used techniques unknown in Han Dynasty China. But the truly mind-blowing discoveries were still to come. Among the artifacts recovered from systematic excavations, researchers found pottery shards that told an incredible story of cultural fusion. Imagine holding a piece of ceramic that's 2,000 years old. On one side, you see traditional Chinese motifs, glazing techniques, and firing patterns that match other Han Dynasty pottery found across China. But on the other side, Western geometric patterns, firing methods that required different kiln designs, and artistic motifs that had never been seen in Chinese ceramics of this period. These weren't Chinese potters trying to copy foreign designs. This was evidence of foreign potters working alongside Chinese craftsmen, creating hybrid artifacts that blended two completely different ceramic traditions. The cultural fusion was everywhere archaeologists looked. They discovered tools that combined Roman metalworking techniques with Chinese materials, agricultural implements that showed Mediterranean farming methods adapted for Chinese crops, even cooking utensils that revealed a fascinating blend of culinary traditions, Roman-style cooking vessels designed for Chinese ingredients. But then came the discovery that would either prove this theory once and for all, or raise even more impossible questions: ancient weapons. Not Chinese swords or typical nomadic weaponry, but blade fragments that showed distinctive Roman forging patterns. The metallurgy was unmistakable. These weapons had been made using the same techniques used by legionary blacksmiths to create the gladius swords that conquered Europe. The carbon content, the folding patterns, even the tempering methods matched Roman military production standards. Dr. Yuan's team eventually documented over 300 artifacts that showed this incredible East-West fusion. Each piece told the same impossible story. Two completely different civilizations had somehow merged in this remote corner of China, creating a hybrid culture that preserved elements of both traditions, while developing something entirely new. The evidence was piling up like pieces of an ancient puzzle, each discovery more incredible than the last. Archaeological layers showed continuous occupation from exactly the period when the mysterious soldiers would have arrived. Construction techniques evolved over generations, showing Roman methods gradually adapting to local conditions. Even burial practices showed a fascinating blend of Roman and Chinese traditions. But then modern science stepped in with techniques that would either validate this incredible theory once and for all, or destroy it completely. The DNA bombshell. Just when the archaeological world seemed ready to accept this incredible story, modern genetic science dropped a bombshell that would complicate everything we thought we knew about Li Qian's mysterious residence. In 2005, a comprehensive DNA study led by Professor Xie Dong from Lanzhou University arrived in Li Qian, with genetic analysis equipment that could trace ancestry with unprecedented precision. The 2005 DNA test results confirmed some of the villagers were indeed of Caucasian origin, leading many to conclude their descent from an ancient Roman army, although others remained less certain. The results were both fascinating and frustrating in equal measure. Picture the moment when Professor Xie opened those genetic analysis reports. The local population definitely carried significant Caucasian genetic markers. That part was confirmed beyond any doubt. Tests found that the DNA of some villagers in Li Qian was 56% Caucasian in origin. In genetic terms, this was extraordinary. European ancestry forming the majority genetic heritage of people living thousands of miles from Europe. But here's the shocking twist that changed everything. The DNA analysis couldn't point specifically to Roman ancestry. Instead, it revealed something far more complex, and honestly, less romantically satisfying than the legend suggested. The genetic evidence indicated that the European bloodlines in Li Qian likely came from multiple waves of migration along the Silk Road trade routes over many centuries. The genetic markers showed influences from various Caucasian populations, some possibly from the Mediterranean region, others from Central Asia, still others from the Iranian plateau. Modern genetic studies of Silk Road populations have revealed something that historians are only now beginning to appreciate. The ancient Silk Road has been a trading route between Europe and Central Asia from the 2nd century BCE to the 15th century CE, and the genetic mixing along these routes was far more extensive and complex than anyone had imaged. Dr. Sarah Caldwell from the University of Cambridge, who specialized in ancient DNA analysis, explained the implications. What we're seeing in Li Qian isn't necessarily evidence of a single dramatic migration event. It's more likely evidence of the kind of gradual genetic mixing that happened throughout Central Asia. As traders, diplomats, craftsmen, and yes, sometimes soldiers, moved back and forth along the Silk Road over many generations. But the scientific scrutiny didn't stop there. Historians began examining that famous fish scale formation with fresh eyes. and what they discovered was devastating to the simple Roman theory. Dr. Michael Lowe, a leading expert on Han Dynasty military tactics, published a comprehensive analysis that dropped this truth bomb. The interlocking shield formation wasn't uniquely Roman at all. Similar defensive techniques had been used by Greek phalanxes, Persian infantry formations, and even some advanced nomadic confederations that had encountered Mediterranean military techniques. Through centuries of warfare and cultural exchange, the Chinese chronicler who described it as unusual wasn't necessarily witnessing uniquely Roman tactics. He might simply have been seeing a defensive formation that was new to Chinese warfare, but relatively common among the various military traditions that had developed along the Silk Road. This revelation forced historians to reconsider everything. Had Chen Tang witnessed Roman survivors from Carrhae? Or had he encountered soldiers trained in Mediterranean-influenced tactics by any number of armies that had adopted and adapted these techniques over the centuries? The mystery was becoming more complex, not simpler, with each new piece of scientific evidence. The missing evidence. And here's where our investigation encounters the most damaging evidence of all. The kind of evidence that prosecutors call the smoking gun, except in this case, it's evidence by its very absence. Extensive archaeological surveys using modern dating techniques, ground-penetrating radar, and systematic excavation methods have revealed something that should give us serious pause. Many of the supposedly Roman-style architectural elements in Liqian were actually built centuries after. The supposed arrival of Crassus's legionaries. Carbon dating of organic materials found in the mortar of those Roman-style walls showed construction dates ranging from the 2nd to the 6th centuries AD, anywhere from 150 to 550 years after the Battle of Carrhae. The rectangular fortifications that seemed so un-Chinese, they could be explained by later military influences from any number of cultures that used similar construction techniques. The pottery fusion that seemed so compelling. Modern ceramic analysis revealed that these hybrid styles appeared gradually, over several centuries, exactly what you'd expect from normal cultural exchange along established trade routes, not from a single dramatic influx of foreign craftsmen. Even the weapons that showed Roman-style forging techniques could be explained by the spread of metallurgical knowledge along the Silk Road. Advanced metalworking techniques didn't stay locked within single cultures. They spread, evolved, and adapted, as knowledge was traded along with goods. But here's the most crucial piece of missing evidence. Despite decades of intensive searching, archaeologists have never found a single, unambiguously Roman artifact in Liqian. Think about what this means. If Roman legionaries had settled in Liqian, we should find definitive proof. Roman military units didn't travel light. They carried distinctive equipment that would leave unmistakable archaeological signatures. Where are the Roman coins? Every legionnaire received regular pay in standardized Roman currency. Where are the military insignia? Roman units carried eagles, standards, and identifying medallions that were sacred to their identity. Where are the inscribed weapons or armor pieces? Roman military equipment was often marked with unit identifications, maker's marks, or personal inscriptions. Where are the unmistakably Roman religious artifacts? Romans maintained their religious practices even in foreign territories. They should have left evidence of temples, altars, or religious objects dedicated to Roman gods. Most tellingly, where are the Latin inscriptions? Romans were compulsive record keepers and monument builders. Even in the most remote corners of the empire, they left Latin inscriptions marking their presence, recording their achievements, or commemorating their dead. Dr. Rebecca Harrison from the British Museum, who has spent her career studying Roman military archaeology, put it bluntly. If Roman legionaries had established a permanent settlement in China, the archaeological signature would be unmistakable. Roman military culture was so distinctive, so materially rich, that its absence is more significant than any ambiguous evidence of its presence. The complete absence of definitively Roman artifacts isn't just disappointing, it's the most important clue in our entire investigation. The Silk Road Revelation. So here we are, after following this incredible trail of evidence across continents, through centuries, and into the laboratories of modern science. We've examined ancient battle accounts, DNA evidence, archaeological discoveries, and historical records. The question that brought us here remains. Did Roman legionaries really end up fighting for China? The honest answer is both simpler and more profound than you might expect. The specific story of Crassus's lost legion marching 4,000 miles to become Chinese warriors is almost certainly a beautiful myth. But it's the kind of myth that captures our imagination precisely because it speaks to something deeper, something true about the ancient world that we've only recently begun to understand. While we were searching for a lost Roman legion, we actually discovered something more incredible: evidence of globalization that happened 2,000 years ago. The town of Liqian represents something that was happening all across the ancient Silk Road. A complex web of cultural exchange that created communities where East truly met West, in ways that seem impossible to our modern understanding of ancient isolation. The European genetic markers in Liqian's population, they're real. The architectural fusion, it happened. The cultural blending evident in pottery, tools, and traditions, all documented and verified. But instead of being the result of one dramatic military transplant, these incredible communities were the product of something even more remarkable. Centuries of continuous cultural mixing as merchants, diplomats, craftsmen, religious pilgrims, and yes, sometimes soldiers. From dozens of different cultures created hybrid communities along the world's greatest trade route. Recent genetic studies of Silk Road populations have revealed migration patterns that would have seemed impossible just decades ago. Scientists have discovered that populations along the ancient trade routes show genetic influence from Mediterranean, Central Asian, East Asian, and even South Asian populations, creating a genetic tapestry that reflects centuries of human movement and cultural exchange. Dr. Wang Xiaodong, who spent 15 years studying this mystery, offered perhaps the most profound insight. The legend of the lost Roman legion reflects our modern desire to find dramatic, singular explanations for complex historical phenomena. But the reality of ancient cultural exchange was far more subtle, far more gradual, and ultimately far more incredible than any single military adventure. What we found in Liqian wasn't Romans trying to remain Roman in China. We found evidence of what happens when human cultures meet, blend, and create something entirely new. The residents weren't preserving Roman identity, they were creating a new identity. That incorporated elements from multiple traditions while adapting to local conditions over many generations. This is actually the most incredible part of our investigation. The ancient Silk Road wasn't just a trade route connecting East and West. It was a cultural laboratory where human societies experimented with globalization. 1,500 years before the word existed, the genetic diversity, the architectural fusion, the technological exchange, the religious syncretism, all of this happened because human beings have always been more connected, more curious, and more adaptable than we give them credit for. The legend of the lost Roman legion captured our imagination because it suggested something we desperately want to believe: that the ancient world was smaller, more connected, and more incredible than our textbooks taught us. And you know what? In that fundamental sense, the legend is absolutely true. The mystery of Liqian teaches us that some of the most important historical truths aren't found in dramatic events or singular explanations. They're found in the quiet, persistent human drive to explore, to trade, to learn, and to adapt. The real story isn't about Roman soldiers becoming Chinese warriors. It's about human beings creating communities that transcend the boundaries we think divide cultures. Sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that remain mysteries, because the mystery itself reveals truths that are more profound than any definitive answer. Legacy impact. So what's your verdict? After following this incredible investigation across 2 continents in 20 centuries, examining DNA evidence, and ancient battle accounts, archaeological discoveries, and genetic studies, what do you believe? Is this the romantic story of Rome's lost legion finding new life as Chinese warriors? Or is it evidence of something even more incredible, proof that human beings have been creating globally connected communities for far longer than we ever imagined? Maybe the answer doesn't matter as much as the journey of discovery itself, because in searching for Romans in China, we've uncovered something that challenges everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. The town of Liqian still exists today. Its residents still carry the genetic legacy of ancient migrations that connected civilizations across impossible distances, And somewhere in those ancient foundations and cultural memories, the echo of a story that may never be fully solved continues to inspire wonder. Sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that remain mysteries. What's your verdict? Legend or truth? Drop a comment and let me know what you believe. And if you want to dive deeper into history's greatest unsolved mysteries, subscribe. Because there are so many more incredible stories waiting to be investigated.